but I want to share with you what I do. And there may be a proper computer science term for this. If there is, I don't know it. I just call this multivariance as an approach. And let's talk about doing it with library packages. So we've spent the last half hour basically establishing that this statement is true and accurate. That it's a fact, it's not an opinion. It doesn't matter, you know, if you don't believe in it, it doesn't change the fact Composer won't install two major versions of the same package. You know, you can't believe your way out of these things at all. Now that's what we call a design constraint. It's something that's imposed upon our solution and we just have to work with it. We can't change it at all. Now, I promise this is relevant. It might seem like a tangent, but it isn't. How many of you build web APIs? Yep, okay. Now, those of you who do build web APIs, I guarantee that you either have or are preparing to support multiple versions of that API live at once. Yep, that looks like 100% to me. And we do that because it's impossible for us to move all our customers onto the new version of the API instantly. Can't do it. Even people like Facebook can't get away with that. They used to do it. They used to shut APIs off and put a new version out like that. Even they can't do it anymore. Those, you know, we certainly can't. But if you're going to do that with web APIs, why don't you do that with your library APIs? Why don't you do the same thing? Why don't you have multiple versions live at once? Yeah? We do it for web APIs, and while we don't like it, it works, and it's a happy medium, isn't it? Between the support effort and customer actually using your service and product. So why don't we do it for libraries? See, there's nothing stopping a package having multiple versions of your API in it at the same time. There's absolutely nothing stopping that. I don't know if anyone's ever realized this. What I mean by that, if we take the package project folder, you'd normally have a source folder in or something like that, or a PHP folder where you'd have then all your code, yes? Just do that. Have a subfolder called version 1. And then when the time comes, have another folder called version 2 inside the same package. Just do that. PSR4 with the autoloader for Composer takes care of that nicely. They can coexist inside the same package at the same time. So you're shipping multiple APIs, just like we do for our web APIs. It's exactly the same approach. We're just using different tools. That's it. That's the approach. Stunned silence.
Something so simple that you'd never thought of.
It's sort of what Socialite does, except for they kind of stop support V1 or OAuth1.
Right.
Yeah, so we tried to use OAuth. What was we trying to connect to? It was one of the YouTube or Dribble. No, it was one of the worst ones. It was only split OAuth1. And I noticed the that Laravel kept Socialite, all the code for Socialite 1 in there.
Yeah.
And then I started writing it for the Socialite 2, but they kept Socialite 1 and 2 already inside Laravel.
Okay.
And it doesn't work, but I guess your case would work because it is versioning.
Yeah, I'm saying explicitly version them, have explicit namespaces with the version number in. Keep the code completely isolated in separate folders. When I do this, when it's time to create version 2, I'll normally copy all the code from version 1 into version 2 and then make the API changes, the backwards compatibility breaks that are going to be there.
How long do you leave it till you start removing legacy versions?
Hold that thought.
Hold
that thought. We're going to come back to that.
We're going to get to the node issue here, aren't we?
We're going to get back to that. But before we do, I want to talk about how it changes the version numbers for packages, because we can't use semver anymore. Which is a problem because all the package managers expect the X.Y.Z type numbering scheme. So we need to come up with something that sort of fits that package managers aren't going to choke on. And what I ended up with is this, and I grant you it's nowhere near as readable as... Sorry?
Devtools.
Date release number. So instead of 1.2.0, an example we used earlier, it would look like that. And there's no two ways about it. It's not as readable. It is not as readable. There's no two ways about it. but it's a number that increments in the way that package managers expect. It's why anytime you put a timestamp in a file name on disk, you should always go year, month, date, because that way everything lists correctly with all the tools. Unix systems work that way. But let's break that down. So X is now the minimum supported API version, which if you've got version 1 and version 2 in there, X is version 1. So everyone who started with version 1 still gets new versions of your package. They're just not going to call the version 2 code. They're going to continue to call the version 1 code. So you're not breaking their stuff at all. We're getting towards your question. What happens when you drop that? I haven't done it yet. I have not dropped a version 1.
I suppose it needs to be going for quite a while to get to that problem, but if every package you used in Composer followed this method.
Yes. Because the reason is when we're back into all the pain we're trying to get away from. So I would argue you could probably keep version 1 around for a very long time. You just don't need to ship any bug fixes for it or any new features. You can just say it's frozen. Just tell people it's frozen. If you want the new stuff, port over to version 2 when you're ready. You can just do that. But eventually you'll drop it, and at that point your package number will bump to 2, so that people who have already installed version 1, because they depend on the API, their code's not going to suddenly disappear on them. You do it that way. The date release number is the year, month, day, and then how many releases you've made that day, which was an addition. I started off with just the date. That lasted maybe half an hour before I went, oh bugger, I need to do a second release. So I tacked a release number on the end.
Forgot to add a readme.
It was more fundamental than that. So let's say 26th of August, we'd done a release. And then half an hour later, I went, oh crap, I need to do a second release. So we bumped the release number on the end. And I'm just using 2 digits. If you've got continuous delivery, for example, and you've got a large or active team, or you've got a lot of contributors coming in to your projects, you might use 3 digits. It's entirely up to you. Problem with Unix timestamps is we don't have Derek here to tell you why it's a bad idea. But I'm sure Derek's done lots of talks on why you should never use Unix timestamps anywhere. I'm sure he has. Talk to him. Talk to Derek. He goes and talks to lots of user groups. He's a great guy for that.
Doing the PHP Southwest in the last 6 months. Fairly recently.
Yeah, I was there for that one. It was a good talk. It was a great talk. And then, coming back to our example, 2 days later, we want to do another release. The day of the month changes, and we go back to 1 because it's the first release that day. It's that simple. And that's fairly straightforward to do with your build systems as well. Now, 3 would be, if we put the release number into the X.Y.Z format like that, that's more readable, I'd argue. I think that's more readable because all of a sudden, thanks to the dots, it's easier to see it's a date, isn't it? But why not that?
You're taking away the X, Y, or you're trying to copy the X, Y, and Z, which will confuse a lot of people, probably confuse Composer as well.
Because
Okay.
you've had a lot of features.
You're on the right lines. You're on the right lines. What we want to do is avoid that confusion. We want to make sure users always get the latest version of our package, as long as they're locked to the right major version number. We don't want people to write rules that lock them in to a release for just that day. Because we want this upgrade path to go incredibly smoothly. We want it to happen without our library users thinking about it. We want that to be the default behavior. But if we split it up into 3 parts, it's possible for users to write dependency rules where they lock onto 1.2018.08.26, for example, which means they'll only get releases for that day. But that's not how our versioning system, our numbering scheme works anymore. There's no value in locking onto just a day's releases ever, because it no longer has any meaning. So we want to avoid that happening. So if we did do that, can you guarantee they would get the first package 2 days later? Can you guarantee that? The problem is it doesn't matter how much you document things for users to say, do your rules this way, you'll be fine. The possibility exists for users to write rules that will not be fine. And if that happened, would you think of checking their composer file to see what rules they put in place? I wouldn't. It'd be the last thing I'd check. So unfortunately, I strongly recommend against a three-part numbering scheme for that. So that's multivariant packages. Ship multiple APIs inside the same package, same tagged package. That's it. It's a shame Steve's left, because I suspect he knows the answer to this. But maybe you guys do. Do you remember how Guzzle solved it? Because they didn't solve it this way.
We renamed it.
They did. And I think they renamed it more than once as well, if memory serves. They certainly renamed it at least once.
It was Guzzle, then Guzzle HTTP, then Guzzle clients.
Yeah. So that was obviously very disruptive to the ecosystem, to Guzzle users. But it's, renaming things is another way to get around it. There's no, there's something else to consider.
It's less standard than using your date.
Well, I don't know anyone else is doing my approach, to be honest. I'm not claiming to have invented it or anything. I'm sure all I've done is discovered something someone else has already done. I'm just not aware of who those are and where it's originated from. It's like when you're solving a problem. Something you read 6 months, a year ago that you've forgotten you've read will still spark a solution somehow, yeah? So I'm not claiming the originality of this. I just haven't seen anyone else do it. Yeah. So what do you think? What's better, renaming packages or actually shipping multiple versions of your API at once?
Depends on the size of the package
Okay.
and how many different versions of the API. But I'd go for, if it's a small package, Guzzle you count as a small package because it has one sensor functionality.
Okay.
It makes sense to do changing its name.
Right.
But I guess if you've got multiple, if you're trying to go for a multi-approach and you're constantly releasing versions, I'd go for your approach of changing the names.
So I think that's a very good answer, because what you're talking about there is understanding the context you're releasing packages in order to make a decision, rather than saying always do it one way or always do it another. So I think it's a very good answer. How about the rest of you?
The other way is more predictable than the Guzzle way.
Yes. Well, that's it, because if that's one downside of renaming it, is if you're not on top of what Guzzle have done, all you see is your updates have stopped and you don't know why. You may not know where to look either.
Some people may not even notice.
Yeah. So it's something to be careful of.